Good morning, everyone. First, I should do a sound check just to make sure that I am being heard. Okay. I'm here again at the request of some delegations who requested that I provide my personal experiences as an OPCW inspector. I'll briefly clarify my situation, what I can do and can't do. I'm attending in my individual capacity as a scientist and a former OPCW inspection team leader with 12 years of service, and I would like to stress impartial and committed service, which was recognized. I have one request for everyone attending today is to please kindly refrain from any suggestion that my role is part of anyone's disinformation campaign.
Okay, yeah, and do you know what
Going further, I should point out that I was not directly involved in the Latanima FFM, whilst I have studied the FFM reports and the reports of the IIT on Latanima. It would be inappropriate for me to provide opinion on that case in this forum. However, I was directly involved with the Duma FFM investigation and the SSRC inspections in Syria. And I'll answer any questions on those topics as best I can. Now, some of you may recall at the previous Arria formula meeting on the Syria chemical dossier, I provided a written statement that subsequently became publicly available. In addition to that, the summary report on the engineering analysis on the Duma cylinders is publicly available. So on that score, there's really little further that I need to add. So why am I here? I speak for myself, but I know there are other Duma FFM inspectors who hold the similar concerns that I do about the manner in which the investigation was controlled, locked down, and the findings reflected in the final FFM report. We believe that there is more than sufficient information out there today that has demonstrated our point that the findings reflected in the FFM report on Duma may not reflect the actual situation. But I'm not imploring you to believe me, to implore you to believe us. That is not science. All we are saying is that surely there is sufficient information, facts out there today that would justify a transparent technical inquiry aimed at clarifying what actually happened in Duma on 7 April 2018. And this needs to be done in a way that demonstrates scientific rigor and integrity, because that currently has not been done. However, the lockdown on Duma remains, how can I say, impenetrable. Our hope, therefore, remains that there's someone with the scientific discipline and integrity to recognize that something may have gone amiss with the Duma investigation and report. Perhaps more importantly, we continue to hope that there's someone who's willing and able, someone who has the courage to do something about this. If and when that happens, we are ready to provide the impartial input of scientists and engineers, and to have the facts and the findings assessed on their merits. That's my introductory statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Aaron Mate. I'm a journalist with the Gray Zone based in the US. It's an honor to speak to you today about what I think is one of the most important and overlooked global stories in recent memory. The OPCW, the world's top chemical weapons watchdog, is facing a serious scandal. Leaks from inside strongly suggest that the OPCW has been severely compromised, and the implications of this are grave. It would mean that in the case of Duma, the OPCW was exploited to accuse the Syrian government of a chemical weapons attack in Duma in April 2018. It would also mean that the OPCW was used to retroactively justify the bombing of Syria by several member states just days after the alleged Duma incident. In short, it appears the OPCW was compromised to justify military strikes. There are also indications that the OPCW has retaliated against two veteran officials, one of them is here today, who were a part of the Duma investigation and challenged the censorship of the Duma evidence. These two OPCW officials are highly regarded scientists with more than 25 years of combined experience at the organization. Yet, instead of being protected and given the chance to air their concerns, these two scientists have seen their reputations impugned by the OPCW leadership. There is substantial evidence to back all of this up, and today I will try to summarize the key details. The OPCW's fact-finding mission, or FFM, deployed to Syria and what is known as Country X to investigate the Duma incident in April 2018. They interviewed scores of witnesses and visited several key sites. They examined gas cylinders found at the scene, took chemical samples, hundreds of photos, and conducted detailed measurements. Upon their return from Syria, the FFM team drafted an extensive and detailed report of their findings. But what the investigators found in Duma is not what the OPCW released to the world. And that is because the investigators who were on the ground in Syria were overruled and had their findings censored. The key facts about this censorship, to my knowledge, are undisputed. First, the investigators' initial report, which was due for imminent publication, was secretively re-edited to produce a version that sharply deviated from the original. Both versions, the original and the altered report, have been published by WikiLeaks. Comparing both reports, we see the key facts were removed or misrepresented. Conclusions were also rewritten to support the allegation that a chlorine gas attack had occurred in Duma. Yet the team's initial original report did not conclude that a chemical attack occurred. In fact, their report had presented the possibility that victims in Duma were killed in an incident that was, quote, non-chemical related, unquote. Though unstated, the reader could easily infer from this that the militants who controlled Duma at the time had staged the scene to make it falsely appear that a chemical attack had occurred. Then there is the toxicology assessment. 4 experts from an OPCW and NATO member state conducted a toxicology review. They concluded that the observed symptoms of the victims in Duma, quote, were inconsistent with exposure to chlorine, and no other obvious candidate chemical causing the symptoms could be identified, unquote. Yet these statements were kept secret and are inconsistent with the conclusions of the final report. There were also chemical tests of the samples collected in Duma. These samples showed that chlorinated compounds were detected at what amounted to trace quantities in the parts per billion range. Yet this finding was not publicly disclosed. Furthermore, it later emerged that the chemicals themselves did not stand out as unique. Most, if not all, could have resulted from contact with household products such as bleach, or come from chlorinated water or wood preservatives. Crucially, the control samples collected by the inspectors to give context to the analysis results were never analyzed. Because of other leaks, we now know that this censorship was challenged from the inside. The chief author of the initial report, identified by the OPCW as Inspector B, was among those who deployed to Syria for the entire Duma mission. Records show he was also, at the time, the OPCW's top expert in chemical weapons chemistry. On June 22, 2018, Inspector B protested the secretive redaction of his report in an email expressing his, quote, gravest concern. I will quote him now. He wrote, after reading this modified report, which incidentally no other team member who deployed into Duma has had the opportunity to do, I was struck by how much it misrepresents the facts, unquote. After that email of protest, and just days before a substitute stopgap interim report was published on July 6th, something very unusual occurred. A US government delegation arrived at the OPCW and met with members of the team in Duma that had gone to Duma to try to influence them. The US officials encouraged the Duma team to conclude that the Syrian government had committed a chemical attack with chlorine. It is worth noting here that the US delegation promoted this chlorine theory despite the fact that it was still not known at that time that no nerve agents had been found in Duma. The Duma investigators reportedly saw the meeting as unacceptable pressure and a violation of the OPCW's declared principles of independence and impartiality. Under the Chemical Weapons Convention, state parties are explicitly prohibited from seeking to influence the inspectors in the discharge of their responsibilities. Inspector B's intervention thwarted the imminent release of the doctored report. But at that point, the OPCW officials began to manage the issuance of a new negotiated report, namely the so-called interim report that was released on July 6, 2018. Although this interim report no longer contained some of the unsupported claims that senior OPCW officials had tried to insert, the interim report still omitted key facts found in the original uncensored report. Around that time, the investigation saw a drastic change. The protesting Inspector B, who had written the original report, was sidelined from the investigation. OPCW executives then decreed that the probe, from that point forward, would be handled by a so-called core team. This new core team made formal the exclusion of all the inspectors who had conducted the investigation in Syria, except for one paramedic. It was this so-called core team, and not the inspectors who had signed off on the original report, that generated the OPCW's final report of March 2019. This final report sharply differed from what the inspectors reported in the suppressed initial report. The final report concluded that there were reasonable grounds to believe that a chemical weapons attack occurred in Duma, and that, quote, the toxic chemical was likely molecular chlorine, unquote. Many crucial facts and evidence redacted from the original report continued to be excluded. The final report also saw a major discrepancy when it comes to witness testimony. The witnesses interviewed offered sharply contrasting narratives, yet only those witnesses whose testimony supported the use of chemical weapons were used to inform the report's conclusions. It is also worth noting the imbalance in witness locations. Although the alleged chemical incident took place in Syria, twice as many witnesses were interviewed in country X. One inference drawn from the OPCW's final report was that gas cylinders found in Duma likely came from military aircraft. But in a leaked engineering assessment assigned to a sub-team of the FFM, the author of this leaked report found otherwise. The OPCW leadership has yet to offer a substantive explanation for why so much critical evidence was excluded and why the original report was radically altered. The OPCW Director General, Fernando Arias, justified the conclusions of the final report and excused alleged fraudulent scientific behavior by incorrectly stating that the FFM undertook the bulk of its analytical work during the last 7 months of the investigation, or after the interim report of July 2018. But a close review of the final report demonstrates that this claim is far from the case. As the dissenting inspectors have noted, by the time the interim report was released, 31 of the 44 samples were analyzed. 34 of the 39 interviews had been conducted and analyzed, and the toxicological study was already done, but its conclusions excluded. In the nearly 8 months after the interim report was released, only 13 new samples were analyzed, along with 5 additional interviews. Comparing the text of the final report to the original report is also instructive. The final report copy and pastes much of the text of the original report, but the one difference is that inconvenient evidence was removed and unsupported conclusions were added. And even if it were true that the bulk of the analysis was done after the interim report, the fact that the OPCW would have conducted the bulk of its work after July 2018 would not in any way explain or justify the alleged scientific fraud committed before it. In fact, it would only raise the possibility that more fraud occurred. Instead of addressing the discrepancies and cherry-picked facts, the OPCW Director General, Fernando Arias, has denigrated the 2 members of the Duma fact-finding mission who challenged the manipulation of facts and evidence. The Director General has falsely portrayed these 2 as rogue actors with only minor roles in the investigation and incomplete information. Yet these 2 inspectors are unlikely candidates to suddenly go rogue. Inspector A, Ian Henderson, who is here today, while the second inspector is known only as Inspector B. He has not been publicly identified. They served with the OPCW for 12 and 16 years, respectively. Internal OPCW appraisals of their job performance offer effusive praise. In 2005, a senior OPCW official wrote that Henderson has consistently received, quote, the highest rating possible. I consider him one of the best of our inspection team leaders, unquote. In 2018, an OPCW superior wrote that Inspector B, quote, has contributed the most to the knowledge and understanding of chemical weapons chemistry applied to inspections, unquote. Another manager described B as, quote, one of the most well-regarded team leaders whose experience of the organization, its verification regime, and judgment are unmatched. It is important to stress here that the internal concerns go beyond the Duma team members. Earlier this year, I heard from an OPCW official who voiced outrage at the treatment of Ian Henderson and Inspector B. I quote this person now. It is quite unbelievable that valid scientific concerns are being brazenly ignored in favor of a predetermined narrative. The lack of transparency in an investigative process with such enormous ramifications is frightful. The allegations of the 2 gentlemen urgently need to be thoroughly investigated and the functionality of the organization restored, unquote. Now, fortunately, the 2 inspectors involved in this Duma controversy have offered a path to transparency into resolving this scandal. Earlier this year, they each wrote letters to the OPCW Director General asking for their concerns to be heard. The inspectors have received support from several prominent figures, including the OPCW's first Director General, Jose Bustani. In October 2019, Bustani took part in a panel that heard a detailed presentation from one of the Duma investigators. Mr. Bustani wrote, quote, the convincing evidence of irregular behavior in the OPCW investigation of the alleged Duma chemical attack confirms doubts and suspicions I already had. I have always expected the OPCW to be a true paradigm of multilateralism. My hope is that the concerns expressed publicly by the panel in its joint consensus statement will catalyze a process by which the organization can be resurrected to become the independent and non-discriminatory body it used to be. I hope that Mr. Bustani's words will be heeded. As a first step, the OPCW can simply do what it has not done so far. Meet with the entire Duma team and let them present the evidence that was censored. It is very concerning that despite these serious allegations here, the OPCW Director General has never met with members of the Duma team, not just the 2 dissenting inspectors that are publicly known, but the entire team. If the OPCW is confident in its conclusions, and it should have no issue with at least hearing a dissenting point of view from its own inspectors. The importance of addressing this issue extends far beyond repairing the OPCW's reputation. Syria is a country that is now trying to rebuild from a devastating, nearly decade-long proxy war that caused massive suffering, destruction, and death. But as Syria is trying to rebuild, it now faces a new kind of warfare in the form of crippling economic sanctions. In justifying the sanctions, the US government has cited, among other things, allegations of chemical weapons used by the Syrian government. The US government also says the Syrian government is the target of these sanctions, but it is the Syrian people who are feeling the pain. The UN rapporteur on sanctions says that, quote, unilateral sanctions applied to Syria have visited untold sufferings on ordinary people. The World Food Program warns that Syrians living under economic blockade now face, quote, mass starvation or another mass exodus. The use of the OPCW to justify warfare on Syria, whether in the form of military strikes in 2018 or economic strangulation today in 2020, is additionally tragic in light of the OPCW's own history. It was just 7 years ago that the OPCW was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for its work eliminating chemical weapons, including in Syria. That was a towering achievement and a hopeful moment for those who seek a world at peace. How unfortunate then,
Oh, man.
top chemical weapons watchdog now potentially being compromised to lodge unproven allegations against Syria and justify warfare against it. The inspectors who have been silenced and maligned are trying to defend their organization's noble legacy from political exploitation. It is my hope that they will be heard. Thank you.
I would like to use a share screen so that I can show some slides, please. Can you see that? Can you see the slides? Okay. Okay, my talk today will basically focus on, my remarks will basically focus on a purely technical set of issues. I should note that I've also done quite a bit of analysis on the Duma report and could provide a talk of a similar nature on the Duma situation from what I found there. The particular report I'm talking about today is the Technical Secretariat report on the Khan Sheikhoun alleged nerve agent attack, which supposedly occurred on April 4, 2017. All of the major findings of that report are basically disproved by the evidence cited in that report, and I'll show you some of this. Incidentally, this briefing has many more slides than I'll show, and anybody who wants a copy, please let me know. First of all, there are several distinctly different methodologies that the OPCW analysts use, all of which lead to a conclusion that there are three distinctly different wind directions that occurred at the time of the alleged nerve agent attack. There can only be one wind direction to explain a nerve agent attack. There were satellite images of 3 alleged bomb locations found by the OPCW, at least they claimed to have found it. They didn't produce those satellite images, but I'll show you the satellite images, and there's no indication of any bomb damage at all. So these are dramatic, just dramatic examples of disparities between what is claimed and what is actually in the evidence that is claimed. The OPCW laboratory evidence of sarin poisoning of a goat is bogus. I can show you that. I have photographs of the dead goat at the alleged sarin release point that show that the goat was drag marks behind the goat. So this animal was poisoned somewhere else, probably with sarin, and then dragged to the location. So anybody who looks at this would certainly wonder about the accuracy of the allegation. There's a crater at the alleged sarin release point that was not produced by the kinetic impact of a sarin bomb, as was claimed by the OPCW. the expert analysis there is literally non-expert. I hate to say it, it's silly. In fact, the crater was produced by an artillery rocket exploding. And because it was an artillery rocket exploding, there was no sarin to be released at that point. Let me just show you a few things just to give you a sense of orientation. These images are taken directly from the OPCW report. So you'll find this somewhat interesting. Here is the sarin release point that was alleged for the report, in the report. And I've just sort of shown it a little bit more clearly here. Then we have the explosion points. There were 3 air points that were supposedly bombed with explosive bombs. And so this is the sarin plume that, again, this is from the OPCW report. And the natural outcome of that plume is that the plume direction has to be associated with the wind. The wind drives the plume in a certain direction. Now, let me underscore that this wind direction is derived from interviews and received evidence. So it's a rather interesting finding. If we look at the weather reported on the day of the attack, at the time of the attack, we see that the wind direction is 90 degrees relative to the direction of the wind direction derived from interviews and received evidence. One would hope that this would have been checked by the analysts when they put together this analysis. As I'll show you next, there's a third wind direction, which has to be the case if the bombs fell where they claimed. But of course, when you look at the bomb locations, you can see no evidence of bomb damage. Let me explain that next. Basically, the area, here's the area where the alleged sarin release occurred. And basically what happened is there was a camera north of the city looking into the city. And it took advantage of an archaeological mound to get reference points. And using that material, the physical location of the archaeological mound, it developed plumb lines in the direction of the debris clouds. Here's one debris cloud, here's another debris cloud. I flipped this thing over. And then the claim is that they searched along these plumb lines to find physical damage from bombing. So let's see what the physical damage from bombing. Of course, they provided no satellite imagery, although they claim to have provided satellite imagery. And in fact, I have the satellite image here. So let me take a look at site 2, bomb site 2. So let me just go back here. Bomb site 2 is this site here. Notice it's misaligned. It's misaligned with what they claim. That's another problem, but not as bad as the problem you'll see. You should try to find the bomb damage. This is a before February 21, 2017. This is April 6, 2017. So this is only 2 days after the alleged attack. And this is 50 meters to give you a sense of scale. And supposedly this is a before and after image from a satellite. Now, here's where they claim the bomb damage occurred. I won't go into it here, but I can in great detail. I want to underscore, I can show in great detail where the damage area should be from a 500-pound bomb. This area should be just rubble. There would be no problem seeing this rubble from this satellite photograph, none at all. Okay, let's look at the second bomb site. This is the bomb site that's most distant. I call it bomb site 3. Here again is the before and after satellite images. So I could leave you a long time. Nobody I know has been able to find the bomb damage because there is none. But here's where they claim the bomb fell. 500-pound bomb. Now, if this was a 500-pound bomb on this building landing at this point, the building would be gone. It would be a pile of rubble, very easily seen from a satellite photograph. Plus, you'd probably see quite a bit of damage to the front of this building across the street. So that doesn't seem to show any damage. Then we have this bomb site 1, which is especially interesting because you can see this large, this wide stem. That's an indication that several bombs were dropped in a pattern. One bomb would leave just a narrow stem. So there's probably 2 or 3 bombs, probably in the 500-pound range, that were dropped. Here again is the before and after satellite photograph. And here's where the claim is that these 3 bombs were dropped, or I'll say 2 in this case. And here's essentially this whole block would have been leveled. So there's no question you would be able to see that from the satellite photograph. So the evidence cited on the bomb damage by the OPCW itself shows no bomb damage. So that's an interesting issue. Now for the poison goat. Here we have several images from videos. Incidentally, the OPCW claimed that it extensively looked at videos. 255 videos, they actually say. I don't understand what they were looking at because if you look at the videos, you see all kinds of indications of fraud. Here is a front-end view of the animal. This goat probably was poisoned with sarin. He has classic sarin. There are other things that could give you these symptoms, but we know that sarin was found on the goat's hair, which was collected by an individual whose allegiances were unknown, since there was no chain of custody enforced here. Notice that when you look behind this carcass, you can see tracks. You can also see a rope on the neck of the carcass. So probably what happened is the carcass was put in a small room, small amount of sarin was put in the room, the animal was poisoned, taken on a flatbed truck, and dragged into this area. There's a lot of video I could show you that indicates that this is likely the outcome, likely what occurred. So for example, you have this report saying the goat hair showed evidence of sarin byproducts. That's true, no question about it. But there was no chain of evidence, no chain of custody. And we can clearly see that anyone who's looking at this would, at a minimum, have serious questions about the veracity of the evidence that it had not been planted. I won't talk about birds here for a little while because I want to stick in the time limit. So let's look at these photographs of that again, these were published by the OPCW. This is the OPCW image. Well, it's very interesting. These images were chosen so that they were at a time before the attack occurred. So if you look up in this area here, this is an image taken after the attack. If you look up in this area here, here's where the supposed sarin release occurred. And notice you can see evidence of craters. This was a rocket attack. There are 1, 2, 3 areas where there are craters, plus the crater, the rocket crater, explosively formed rocket crater that was alleged to be from a falling bomb. Here's an example of a close-up of this. This is the actual crater. I'll show you shortly how we know the direction. We know the direction from which this artillery barrage came. I'll explain why. In fact, because a UN manual describes how you find this. And so that basically the rocket barrage came in, rockets landed here and here, and things were coming in from this general direction. I won't go through this. So let's take a look at the area where this crater was. Here's the crater seen from a drone. This is north. This is the wind movement as determined by the weather. I'll assume that the weather is the best indicator of the direction of wind at the time of the attack. And what we see here is that there should have been massive casualties if there was a significant release point, because this was a well built up area. Immediately, not hundreds of meters down in another direction, but immediately adjacent to the bombed area, to the supposed allegedly bombed area. Here we see people in the crater. This is the crater formed by an exploding artillery rocket, not by a sarin bomb, because this crater would be still filled with moist sarin in the soil. Sarin behaves a lot like water. So if these guys came in a few hours later with these masks, which have no effect on gas, sarin gas, they'd be dead. No question about it. It's, you know. All right, so how do we know the direction of this artillery rocket? Well, we see from this manual. I can give you blow-ups of the manual for those of you who want it. This is verification of minefields, explosive remnants of war and crater analysis from the UN, a UN manual. So this is what the UN gives its peacekeepers when it deploys them, and it explains how to identify and determine the direction of a rocket from an artillery fire from the shape of the crater. Here is the crater. This is the Khan Sheikhoun crater. Notice it's got exactly the shape shown in the UN manual. And if we look at the crater with an overlay from the UN manual, we can see that the crater has the same general shape. The length of the crater will change because the angle of impact and of the exploding munition will cause the crater to be a little longer or shorter. The crater will be deep at the front because that's where the explosion starts digging the crater, the explosion of the warhead. The shrapnel from the warhead, the fragments from the warhead are thrown out in bands, in very narrow bands. So this means that this cabinet, this transformer cabinet that was supposed to be hit, according to the experts, these were no experts. I want to be very clear. These were not experts. They claimed that these experts supposedly claimed there had to be fragment damage on these cabinets because the fragmentation from an exploding rocket would have put fragments into it. But that's clearly not true. So let me just show you. Here's an example of the fragmentation pattern from a rocket warhead, from an exploding rocket warhead in Mariupol. You can see the line of damage from the fragmenting warhead is very well defined, very well defined. There's nothing out here. Things you see out here are just fires and stuff that were initiated. So the basic situation is that there was no bomb dropped. This was a rocket that exploded in the pavement. It was misidentified by people who falsely identified themselves as experts. I have talked to several, I want to underscore, several US military officers who are artillery officers, and every one of them agreed instantly that this was an artillery crater. So if you have an artillery officer, an officer who specializes in artillery, their lives depend on identifying these craters and finding out the direction from which an enemy is firing. If you had a bomb fall, the bomb would have left debris of all kinds around the crater. There was no debris, none at all. There was a little cap that people were talking about. They may as well put a roll of toilet paper there and claim that that was an indication of the bomb. Here's even a Scud. The Scud comes in at Mach 5.5. And you can see the carcass of this Scud is landed on the desert in Saudi Arabia. So the idea that there would be no debris from a bomb that was a sarin-filled bomb is totally ridiculous. I want to underscore that. I'm not trying to be nasty. I'm just saying it's just absurd. Anybody who claims that is not an expert as they claim. So let me just end here and simply say there is absolutely no evidence, none. The OPCW's own evidence shows that nothing at all they claim of a technical nature in this report is supported by their own evidence. And I'll end here. Thank you.
I'd just like to confirm my sound is working. Yes. Right. This was quite an eye-opener to me. Far from be it my role to castigate the distinguished excellencies, delegates, colleagues, but I'd have to say I'm bitterly disappointed. And having been around for long enough, I did not necessarily expect anything different. There was no discussion. It was a series of political statements and from both sides, from my point of view, propaganda. But this is the world that we live in. This is the world that I was posed with in my time with the OPCW. My role here now is to defend the OPCW and the Technical Secretariat. I'd like to make that very clear. Disinformation campaigns, discrediting the OPCW, this has got, from my point of view, nothing to do with that. I noticed that there is still, and there, since day one on the Duma investigation, there has been no willingness or desire whatsoever to even contemplate the fact that there could be some science, facts, and engineering that demonstrate an outcome contrary to the FFM report. To this day, no one, not one person, other than attempts from some anarchistic journalists, no one formally has approached me and said, can you tell me your experience, what happened? With the exception of one. After the Duma FFM report was released, there was something of a crisis in the Technical Secretariat. This is prior to the unkind leaking of my engineering report. So prior to that, we were deciding what to do. I made it clear that the findings of the FFM report were not supported by science or engineering. And I can make that clear to anyone who is interested in that. I was then invited by a delegation from one of the Western states parties, and I provided a full briefing. At the end of that briefing, the gentleman said, "This is really serious. This is very big. It will certainly go higher. This will go very high." And then he said, by way of apology, he said, "But of course you realize we won't be able to do anything about this." That's the situation I faced and I continue to face to this day. Out of all of the statements made today, I believe I'm the only one who has spent a lot of time in Syria, including in Damascus and in Duma and other locations. I have had an involvement in all three of the Syria operational missions, the DAT, the SSRC, and the Duma FFM. Now, I don't want to be naive or overly cynical, but I noticed that many of the political statements were cut and paste. And that's the way things work. That's to be expected. But I do sympathize in a way. That's your job. And I can understand the panic caused by the possibility that there is clear science, engineering, facts and information that call into question the Duma FFM investigation. Why? Because that's the only one, the first and the only investigation where we, the OPCW inspectors, actually got to the site of the alleged incident, and we did our work. And I thank you for some of your commendations for the impartiality, the professionalism, and the difficult work, often in dangerous circumstances. We did experience that in many missions, including Duma, but we are apparently not included under that because the Duma FFM report was written by one person who'd only been to Turkey and another who had not deployed anywhere. I'll now respond to a question implicitly raised by the gentleman from Indonesia. And let's look at, try and get some positivity. What could be done to fix the situation? What did I experience that was clearly, in my view, a problem? It's not with the OPCW, it's not with the Technical Secretariat. It's a fantastic organization, and there are hundreds of impartial, committed staff members who've made it the success that it is. However, in the Syria mission, it has very clearly evolved into something different from what it should be. First of all, the Syria missions are run by a handful of staff who report to the Office of the Director General through the Chief of Cabinet, who reports, I'd have to say, in my experience through observation, to some of the key Western delegations, and obviously the US permanent representative plays a leading role in that. The first thing to fix is that the Syria missions need to be subjected to the same professional peer review as the rest of the work of the Technical Secretariat. This single line of control through a Chief of Cabinet, the former being British and the current French, reporting directly to influential delegations cannot be allowed to persist. So that's the first thing to fix it. The second thing is the reliance of the FFM and the GIM and the IIT on carefully selected external experts who remain anonymous and whose work is selectively cherry-picked by the FFM, IIT, or GIM to serve the generation of a result that is generally, if not always, been the expression of an opinion from those individuals as to what they thought was the most likely outcome. Hence the use of the words, it's reasonable to believe that this is the most likely situation. And hence the problem with Duma, where for the first time there is a clear volume of scientific, engineering, and procedural facts and information that will be used, can be used to prove otherwise. Which leads to the third thing to fix is that these investigations in Syria need to have set a more realistic minimum standard of evidence. And I put evidence in inverted commas. This is information, data, materials, open source or whatever. And these minimum standards need to be supported by science, and it's transparent science, not the selective excerpts from opinions provided by carefully selected anonymous experts. I think I've probably said more than I should already. And my request remains out there. Don't believe me, but just take it seriously enough to believe, as was the case in Iraq in 2002. I had a light-hearted bet on Iraq. My view was, no, sanity will prevail. We in the WMD intelligence information area, we know what the case is, and it must prevail. It must get through at some stage. I lost the bet because it didn't. And I hate to say, I see the same sort of thing happening now. But again, as I said, the lockdown has become impenetrable, and it probably will remain that way. So one or two final remarks. When I reviewed the DAT dossier during the preparation for the first inspections of the SSRC, having been around for much longer than many other people, having been in the starting group of team leaders in the Secretariat in 1997, we were faced with all of the initial declarations from the possessor states. The level of inconsistencies, discrepancies in their declarations, I found to be roughly the same as the questions I saw having been raised in by the DAT on the Syrian declarations. There were mistakes. There were things that should have been declared and were only declared under pressure, such as the Ricin program. And there were some aspects about the pinacolyl alcohol and SOMAN detected in the SSRC. But none of these reached the level that would have, in the early days, had triggered this years of questioning and to and fro on these so-called inconsistencies, omissions in the declaration. I will share with you some of the wording that was used by various people in the Secretariat in reference to the DATS dossier. The wording was, keep the file open. That was the primary thing. Keep the file open, keep the pressure on. Now, I'm not going to pretend I have the political nous to interpret exactly what that meant, who it was raised by, but in the absence of any progress I see being made, I think I'll leave that thought with you. Thank you.
I'll be very brief. There was a lot of comments today from certain member states that there is an effort here to denigrate the OPCW. I just want to echo Ian Henderson in saying that I'm not here to denigrate the OPCW. I'm here to defend the OPCW from exploitation. And it is telling that you have two veteran celebrated inspectors from the OPCW, one of whom is here today, Ian Henderson, coming to you with serious concerns, proposing a very simple proposal, which is that given the controversy, given the conflicting claims and facts, that these inspectors be granted the opportunity to meet with the Director General and other OPCW officials, along with the rest of the Duma team who actually went to Syria to prevent their findings. And anybody who fails to support that proposal, I have to wonder about why. There was talk from the British ambassador, Ambassador Allen. He made reference to my Twitter account and said, for some reason, as if my Twitter account has some bearing on the reliability of my reporting. I'm flattered, Mr. Allen, that you pay attention to my Twitter account. I'm not sure what it has to do with whether or not the OPCW was compromised, but regardless, I would encourage you to, at minimum, pay as much attention to my Twitter feed as to the actual OPCW scientists who went to Syria, wrote a report, and had their report censored, and now want to present their findings to the OPCW in a transparent manner. I want to close finally by quoting the inspectors because they have proposed a very simple path, which is simply to have their concerns aired. Ian Henderson, who we've heard from, he wrote to the Director General Arria in a letter earlier this year, "Our sole duty is to be true to the facts and the science. And once that has been achieved, we will gladly accept the proven and agreed scientific outcomes." Inspector B, who again wrote the initial report, was at the time the OPCW's top expert in chemical weapons inspections. He wrote to the Director General, quote, "You need only look at our impeccable records and support to the Technical Secretariat over a combined tenure of almost 30 years. That we would suddenly go rogue at the autumn of our careers with nothing to gain and everything to lose defies all logic. Why would we risk so much to push a personal view? Hardly. Something has gone wrong inside the OPCW, sir, and we wanted you to know. It's that simple." I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I am a scientist by training, but I have worked as an analyst for the Congress. I worked as a scientific and policy advisor to the Chief of Naval Operations, who commands more ships, more planes, and more people under arms than the combined forces of the UK, France, and Germany. Okay, so I have some experience here. And I went to MIT after a career that was out of academia on an academic record that got me tenured at a full professor level when I was hired. And I also have had the privilege of working during my career with several senior distinguished diplomats. So I'm not I know some of the world of diplomacy. I've worked with the U.S. ambassador to China. I've worked with a British permanent representative to the UN and a British high commissioner to India, 2 ambassadors to NATO, and the ambassador who negotiated the Confidence and Security Measures Building Agreement in Europe, which our British, French, and German friends did benefit from. I have not in my experience seen such a disservice to international law as I have witnessed here today. The UN is an important international vehicle for enforcing international law. And if you people are not interested in facts, then there can be no justice. Fooling around with these statements, which I'm very familiar with because I've seen them over many years, and not knowing your basic facts is just, I must say, I'm not trying to hide my outrage. Let me give you just an example of the outrage I just heard repeated by the French, the British. You said that the munitions in Houta were used against the people in Zamalka by the Syrian government. Well, that may be true, I don't know. But let me tell you a fact that your own UN inspector, Aka Selstrom, agreed with me. He was the chief investigator in the Damascus case. We agreed that the munition could only have a range of 2 kilometers, which put it absolutely inside the rebel-controlled areas where this attack occurred. Now, maybe you guys can explain it to me. I'm just a scientist from MIT, but you ought to get your facts right before you just come out with these absolute statements. And I must say, I really am outraged. I feel naive. I came here to give you a talk that was purely technical. And it could be disproved by technical means if you had the technical means to do it, but you don't. Instead, I've been called malicious, propagandist, chutzpah by the German, who I find it particularly annoying, and participating in a charade. Well, let me say to these three distinguished diplomats, anytime you would like to have a discussion, anytime, bring all your technical people and let them try to tear me apart on what I presented to you. And if I sound angry, I am, because I believe in the UN and I believe in the OPCW. And frankly, the way you guys have behaved today, I don't think you believe in those organizations. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, gang, and thank you for co-hosting this meeting. I think that we came to an end of it. I sincerely thank all the participants, and in particular, of course, the three briefers for their insight, for their courage, and for their approach. And I think that nobody can challenge that the approach that they demonstrated was objective. And I think we should continue this dialogue we should continue this dialogue in order to find the truth, which is sometimes hidden behind many layers of insinuations that we witnessed through all these years of the Syrian chemical file. I thank you for participating and goodbye.